Hello viewers, this is In Depth. My name is Ian Wambe. And today in our episode we are reviewing the national budget which is set to be launched by the government of Zimbabwe on the 26th of November 2020. And to discuss this I'm joined by two gentlemen in studio. I have Mr. Titus Mkowe, economic analyst. Mr. Mkowe, welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the program.
We are also joined by Mr. Famba Ingirande from ZimCode, Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Wambi.
Now, let's get straight to the discussion, Mr. Mkowe. The Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Mtuli, said that the budgets from now up to 2025 will be guided by the NDS, the National Development Strategy 1, which was launched a couple of days ago. How do you see four main principles which are in the NDS guiding or shaping the budgets that are coming, starting with this one for 2021?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So if I'm to answer the question, I will have to give a brief background in terms of the National Development Strategy as well as the 2021 budget, and like you've rightly said, 2021 to 2025 budgets. Remember, we are coming away from the TSP, which is ending this year in December 2020, and the government has since launched the National Development Strategy, which is 2021 to 2025, and there will be a National Development Strategy 2026 and 2030. So this is the national vision that we have. So these budgets that the minister will actually be presenting, starting with the 2021 budget, will actually be actually mainly focused on actually driving the economy towards achieving the vision that we have, the vision 2030 vision that the government has in terms of driving the economy to be an upper middle class economy by 2023. So the 2021 budget is the one that is especially important because it is going to act as a bridge between the transitional stabilization program, which is coming to an end this year, as well as the national development strategy. And the most important pillar that we have in the national development strategy is in terms of inclusive growth, where the minister has actually said they expect the economy to grow with 7.5% in 2021, and thereafter the economy is expected to grow with 5%. So we expect the minister to come up with policy measures that will actually drive the economy towards growth.
So do you see these policies coming from these four main principles and other principles in the NDS document?
Yes. If you see the principles that are in the national development strategies, we expect the same pillars to be in the national budget for 2021, so that there is an alignment between the two policies. That is the national vision policy of national development under the national development strategy, as well as the national budget that the minister will actually be coming up with, starting with the 2021 budget.
Mr. Ngirand, he said that he expects the budget to be guided on these four principles and other key elements within the NDS one. What is your take on how the link between the budget and the NDS should work, and what probably are we expecting from this presentation?
Well, first and foremost, it is important that the government has been transparent in putting out its intentions. Therefore, you realize that the question really is on the how part. How do we translate the vision of an inclusive and progressive society into reality?
Which is exactly what we want to try and find out from you, to say where is the link now? How do they translate the NDS into the budget and work it properly?
And in which regard there's a lot of work to be done. We need to put this NDS into perspective. In putting it into perspective, we need to highlight what exactly is NDS attempting to solve. Is what the NDS attempting to solve priority to most people? Is it adequate to enhance our domestic resource mobilization? I'm not even talking only about the financial resources amongst our people. Is it adequate to unlock people's aspirations so that every Zimbabwean everywhere is willing to contribute towards the achievement of these broader aims? But off the bat, Vambi, we must really look closely at what do we mean when we say an upper middle income economy. What does it mean? And what does it especially mean to the person who's right now struggling, for example, to bounce back from the losses incurred during the lockdowns after COVID hit?
We are obviously going into details and try and find out what exactly does it mean for the country to be an upper middle income economy. But just to get to the discussion where President Mnangagwa actually said that he has identified agriculture and mining as two key sectors to the country's economic turnaround. And looking at the previous budgets, you recognize that the Minister of Lands, Agriculture, Water and Climate and Rural Resettlement, in the previous budget, it received 11,338,619,000 while the Minister of Mines and Mining received 353,727,000. Are we expecting to see higher allocations to this? Are we expecting to see mining getting more money? Because previously, Minister of Lands and Agriculture got more money. Now in this budget, as he had said, that these are two key ministries to the economic turnaround. What are we expecting, Mr. Mkowe?
Remember the immediate targets of the budget of 2021 in the NDS is their own growth, right? And like we have rightly pointed out, the president has identified agriculture and mining as the key sectors in the economy that can drive the economy. And rightly say, like yes, that actually pointed out, we need to optimize on the value of our natural resources. We have a comparative advantage in the agriculture sector, although it has been neglected for a number of reasons over the years. We know sanctions, we know land reform gaps that we had, and we also have a factor endowment in terms of the minerals. So we need to drive our economy basing on the factors that we have as our comparative advantage in our economy. And the programs are already underway. We have seen that actually the minister actually pushing an agenda where agriculture will be funded by the private sector, which I can call commercial agriculture system, where the private sector will be actually funding the agriculture. We've also seen the minister, also the government itself coming up with agriculture models that benefit the vulnerable people, the Formalizing program, which is ongoing. So we actually expect the government to continuously support that, so that we drive the level of output that is produced through the agriculture sector in our economy. And again, we should not ignore mechanization, livestock, as well as the marketing of the agricultural products, so that there will be actually productive value chains in that sector. The same applies with mining. We expect the minister to come up with measures that actually increase productivity in mining. The vision under the National Development Strategy is that the mining sector will be a 12 billion sector by 2023. So I actually expect the minister to actually come up with measures that would support mining, so that we drive growth through.
So for you, you're actually expecting the mining sector to receive more allocation from the government this time around throughout these 4 years that we actually talked about before, to say the government is prioritizing NDS as the main document. Now the budgets will be guided by the NDS document. So is mining likely to get more money than any other ministries?
Not really. I'm expecting mining to get a bigger allocation compared to last year. But this year, actually, I expect the budget to be allocated more in terms of the social welfare and social protection.
Mr. Ngirande, you've heard what he said. Do you agree to his view?
Well, first we need to unpack from the top, starting with the sense that who benefits when we achieve growth? This growth orientation is based on the premise that when we make a lot of money, it will trickle down to the people. Yet when you look closely, we don't have the mechanisms that ensure that the economic benefits are shared equally amongst our people. And that's a problem that we need to address. He rightly says that we are coming out of pandemic. We are also coming out of lockdown. Remember, our economy is highly informalized. Most people were subsisting on the informal economy, buying and selling, trading with each other. But under lockdown, the activity in the informal economy slowed down. Now, those people require urgent stimulus, because it is those same people that have the responsibility for our children's health, for our children's school fees, for our housing, and all those things that make Zimbabweans live a decent life. So to start off with, we must not be talking about growth as a priority. We must be talking about human development as a priority. Now, one of the principles in the NDS says that we want bold and transformative programs. Now, when you think bold and transformative programs in the context of pandemic, you're thinking we must be doing more right now, for example, to ensure that all our kids everywhere are in school right now. Their teachers are remunerated.
You are raising very key points there, but the question is growth an event or is a process? But we'll get more to answer those questions right after this break. We take a short break. We'll continue with the discussion just after these words. This is the second segment of your weekly current affairs program, In Depth. Now, before we went for the break, you talked about the growth trickling down to the people on the streets. how do you describe that, or how do you explain the link that people should expect from the budget and the growth that can actually feel in the street?
Well, we need transformative changes, because if one of the principles in the NDS is bold and transformative measures to address our challenges, then surely the architecture of the budget in terms of where we're putting money should reflect that orientation. So what bold and transformative measures say to me is that we need to invest more in the young people, because 67.7% of our population is below 35. And these are people that need taking care of. We need to invest more and better in them. We need to ensure that our budgets have stabilizers that ensure that when shock events happen, there's a cushion for all our young people. We need predictability in the way we take care of our young people. We've been talking more and more about a universal basic income grant that says by virtue of being a Zimbabwean, you're entitled to dignity. Dignity here implies that you go to a clinic, there's drugs, there's personnel to take care of you. You go to schools in this digital economy, there are digital tools for children everywhere in our country. So those are the bold and transformative measures that Zimbabweans are looking forward to. Now the challenge why I problematized the growth orientation is because of this. For us to achieve the kind of growth that is being underpinned by NDS, it assumes that we angle ourselves for foreign direct investment.
Let me get this straight from you, Mr. Ngirande. You are saying that what's key is for the country to share the growth that we are getting. But my question is to say, how does NDS translate to growth through the budget? Because when you look at it contextually, NDS is now the main document. This is what you are getting. And it's a process, like he said earlier on, to say the government started with the TSP, now NDS 1, NDS 2 is coming. What can the budgets do to ensure that they supplement what the NDS wants to achieve?
So I'm saying the NDS is attempting at achieving middle income status, but the drivers of this economy, who are the young people of this country, are the ones that we need to be premising the ambitions of the NDS around. If we're premising our economic ambitions around ensuring that young people in Zimbabwe contribute to the utmost to the growth and benefit equitably from the benefits of our economy, it means that this NDS must be explicit in terms of how it will unlock the potential in our young people. This means that we invest more in our education, we invest more in our health, we invest more ensuring that Zimbabweans are able to compete effectively in a globalized economy.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mkove, you heard what you said. Do you agree to his view?
Yes, I agree to you with this view to some extent. I think we should not confuse the NDS and the national budget that is the minister is going to present tomorrow. The NDS is the long-term strategy, the long-term vision of the government. And to achieve the long-term targets of the government, you need to implement medium-term strategies as well as tactical strategies. You know, even from business point of view, we have got long-term strategies, you've got middle-term, and you've got the tactical strategies. So these are a national budget is a middle-term strategy that is meant to achieve the national vision, and the national vision is actually explicitly explained in the national development strategy. So how do we achieve that vision? We need to come up with national budgets that actually help us to achieve the targets of the national development strategy. And if I'm to add more to that, the government is not saying its vision is only on growth. Its vision actually, if you are to go through the national development strategy, and if you are also to go through the budget strategic document that the government actually released in October of this year, where they were saying that those are the areas that they are going to consult the tripartite under the tripartite negotiation, and every sector of the economy, it has various sectors the way it is going to touch on. So it's not only going to focus on growth, although growth is the main target. When we say an economy is developing, we'll be looking at growth, but they are not only going to focus on that. So if you have actually gone through the document on budget strategic document that the minister released in October, you see that it had about 7 pillars, and one of the pillars was inclusive growth and macroeconomic stability. Remember, we're coming from COVID-19, so the stability still needed before we talk of growth, but growth was actually emphasized on that. And he also emphasized on human capital development and well-being, where he was actually emphasizing that he's going to consult on how to make sure that there is universal access to health, how there is going to be access to education, as well as social protection aspects of the budget. So the budget will cater for that. It's not only going to look at the development aspect. It's also going to look at the aspects of infrastructure development, because infrastructure is key in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of bringing efficiency to the business. If there's no infrastructure, business will not actually function well. Those are the aspects that the budget will try to address, so that we achieve the visions or the targets of the national development strategy. He also said he's going to look at the aspects such as to do with infrastructure, ICT development, as well as digital economy. And if you remember from the 2020 budget, which was released last year, there was an aspect that was catering for the youth, the startups business. I'm sure the term was
it was focusing more on youth empowerment.
Yes.
And there needed to be projects established on that. But before maybe you go on, let's talk about government's revenue. You realize that the government gets most of its revenue from taxation, and at the same time, the government is also losing money through people who are evading tax, and people are not paying the tax that they are supposed to be paying. And it is estimated that the country has lost about 32 billion in the past 2 decades, and an average of 34 million annually. And these are not very good figures for the government. Now, with the mining sector accounting for about 70% of the money lost, what measures can be put in place through probably budget and other means to tighten revenue collection means?
Okay, the first thing on that is that the processes are already underway that are meant to reduce or to stem leakages. The first thing is we need to capacitate our institutions, and at the same time reduce the levels of corruption. Then the second thing that the government is already doing is formalizing the informal sector. We know that most of, not necessarily most, but a significant proportion of output from mining was through artisanal mining, which was not going through the formal system. There are processes that are also undergoing, that are actually formalizing that sector in order to reduce the leakages. And the other thing is that ZIMRA is being capacitated, and is actually modern softwares are being put in place in ZIMRA in order for them to reduce leakages. If you are to do an analysis of the leakages that the country was actually experiencing, you see that they have been reduced significantly in 2020 and 2019 compared to the previous years, because ZIMRA is now using the modern systems that are actually meant to reduce leakages in terms of the revenue.
We talked about the high figures which the country is losing money to these leakages. What do you think should be done to tighten revenue collection means?
Again, the NDS talks about bold and transformative measures. So you want to see the budget reflecting that. So in terms of institutional reform, you want to see the budget effectively capacitating particularly our parliament, so that our parliament has an oversight and accountability role that it plays, ensuring that all the transactions, all the tax incentives that we're giving to foreign companies are monitored and are measured against our constitutional dictates.
But how feasible is it that you can see the government introducing you talked about bold measures and transformative measures within remember, budget lasts for a year.
Yeah.
Do you think it's very feasible for them to have those bold measures introduced within the budget?
You see, where you put your money really reflects your priorities. So we want to see a government that reflects a priority option for the people. So in this case, we're saying we want a budget, for example, that responds to the reality of the youth situation. Most young people are unemployed. Some of them who are pushing mining in Zimbabwe are employed in the artisanal mining sector. So in which regard, you want to see a 12 billion mining vision underpinned by strategic efforts to ensure that young people in the artisanal mining sector are catered for, are unionized, have social protection mechanisms, are registered. All those specific support measures need to be put in place, so that we're not ending at saying we're going to make 12 billion, but we're also clear about who's going to benefit from this 12 billion. But we're also creating channels for young people like me and you, who are taking degrees in our universities, to be able to play a part in the growth and development of our nation.
What then, in your opinion, are these bold and transformative measures? Let's talk about the mining sector, which you made reference to. What measures do you think should be introduced?
For one, we need to be clear how many artisanal workers are there, where they are, and then we need to consult them. And you see, that's the other challenge that we're talking about when we talk about institutional reform, is that we need to address the problem of representation. Who is representing artisanal miners when we are prioritizing our budget? Do they have a say? Are they getting just returns for their contribution to the national fiscus? So our budget consultative process must be broadened to ensure that all those sectors have space in our democratic systems to also articulate their priorities, such that the priorities in the NDS, even as they come out in the financial vision in the budget, are aligned with the needs and priorities of the people on the ground, because budgets and development strategies are for people. And that's why we're saying we don't want a development strategy that is obsessed with the achievement of growth, or that just leaves things at capitalism will solve every problem that we're facing. But we want a development strategy in the budget that has a people face.
That is key points that you're raising there. But maybe briefly to you, Mr. Mkowe, we have seen you talked earlier on about the pre-budget paper that was presented by the minister, which is running under the theme Building Resilience and Economic Recovery Post. We want to talk more about this in terms of it actually speaks to how does the TSP and the NDS link together for the economic development. So we'll talk about those issues just after we take this short break. Viewers, do stay with us and we'll continue with the discussion after these words. This is the third and final segment of your weekly program, In Depth, where I am joined by two gentlemen in studios. We are previewing the national budget, which is set to be released by the government of Zimbabwe on 26 November. I am talking to Mr. Titus Mkowe, an economic analyst, as well as Mr. Famba Ingirande from Zimcode. Now, gentlemen, before we went for the break, we talked about the TSP and the NDS, being the bridge to country stability and then development. What sort of strategies do you expect to be included within the national budget or mechanisms in the budget to ensure that the stabilization achieved by TSP can be translated to growth and development in the NDS one? What are the expected strategies in the national budget?
Okay. Like you've rightly pointed out, if we were to do a close analysis of the budget development the budget development strategy that the minister came up with, it had clear pillars of what the national budget for 2021 intends to achieve, and those pillars actually clearly show a transition from TSP into national development strategy. Like you've actually asked, the main aspect that they are going to address is actually on in inclusive growth as well as macroeconomic stability. We know that stability was somehow affected by the COVID-19, but the stability we've actually realized it in terms of the fiscal stability as well as the monetary stability. And some of the strategies that I'm actually exploiting there is actually on consolidating on the processes of devolution that the government has actually been going through with the national budget for 2020. So I'm actually expecting the government to actually consolidate and push further the agenda of devolution, because it is key in terms of development in various areas in our country. We also expect the government to actually contain expenditures, that is in terms of the recurrent expenditure. That is what we are actually expecting, because the biggest proportion of the budget must go towards capital expenditure, and we've seen an initiative and the enthusiasm by the government in terms of actually putting the bigger percentage of the budget towards capital expenditure, that is the utilities, infrastructure development, etc.
So controlling budget expenditure becomes key to achieve development, in your opinion?
Yes, controlling the sections in the government expenditure. Recurrent expenditure is needed. We need to pay wages. We need to meet our short-term expenditures as the government. But the budget must drive the economy towards growth. So we are actually expecting the minister to come up with measures that actually restrain in terms of the growth of unnecessary recurrent expenditure by the government, and the majority of the budget being allocated towards capital expenditure. And another thing is that you're actually expecting the government to come up with measures that support the development and support the productive value chain. Like I have said that in the agriculture sector and in the manufacturing sector. Agriculture sector, we've already discussed it in detail. There's need to support mechanization. Yes. There's need to support from foods. There is need for to come up with measures that incentivize the private sector that would support agriculture. And in terms of the manufacturing sector, we expect the government to come up with measures that actually support the industries that are into import substitution. We also expect the government to come up with measures that drive growth, because if we are to import to support import substitution, that can actually create jobs for the for the local people. We also expect the budget to actually optimize the value of our natural resources. That is through supporting the mining sector. We've discussed the mining sector before. We also expect the government to come up with a budget that would support the tourism revival strategy. Tourism has been affected by COVID, so that sector is a key sector to the economy and it needs support. So we actually expect the budget tomorrow to come up with measures that would support the tourism sector, since it is one of the major contributors in terms of economic growth. Like I have said before, again, we expect the national budget tomorrow to cover in the aspect of human capital development and well-being, inclusive access to education, inclusive access to health, as well as social protection and nutrition.
Gentlemen, you remember very well that Professor Mtuli said that between the period from January 2019 to June 2020, a budget surplus of Zimbabwean dollars 195 billion was realized budget surplus. What does that mean for the general citizen? How do people feel this budget surplus? Or probably let's start by explaining with you, Mr. Ngirante, what does the term budget surplus mean to the general Zimbabwean?
Well, and that's important. What does it mean to the general Zimbabwean?
Yes.
Because it means something else to the people whom we are angling for foreign direct investment. That is people like the World Bank and the IMF, who believe in policies such as austerity measures, where they are saying a government must cut back on some of its responsibilities in order to ensure that the books are balanced. So when we say we have reduced the budget deficit and achieved a budget surplus, we're saying we have reduced the gap between what we have made and what we have spent on, which is a good thing sometimes, but not at this moment that we're in, because we are in a moment of profound challenge where you want to see bold and transformative measures to release the power of government spending.
But how can we say that the budget surplus during this time is not the good thing that we want when we are all looking forward to development? Does not come from things like budget surplus?
Because the problem with it is this. You see, for your economy to function, you want to stimulate aggregate demand. You want for you, when you go out, to be able to buy ice cream and do stuff with your money, so the person who's supplying your ice cream, anything in our economy has a market. So you want Zimbabweans who can provide a market for Zimbabwean goods. Now, if the government stops spending on Zimbabweans, how will Zimbabweans be able to afford? Because most Zimbabweans, remember, are employed by our government. These are our teachers. These are our nurses who right now are agitating for better conditions of service. So
yes, that's a complete, very large discussion that we can go on and talk about. But just to bring the same issue to you again, Mr. Mkowe, do you agree to say that budget surplus, is it a better item? How do we have to contextualize the budget surplus as we move forward towards development?
From where we were coming from as an economy, we needed stability. Hence the reason why there was a transitional stabilization program. We had the perennial twin problems of the budget deficit and current account deficit. So the government was clear in terms of austerities, like he has actually pointed out, that there was need for stability in terms of the current account as well as the budget the budget position. So now going forward, the minister has been clear in terms of that.
And it's said that we are running out of time, but I will allow you to briefly, in 30 seconds, to tell us the last words regarding this national budget which we are set to receive, starting with you, Mr. Ngirante.
Well, we want to see a government that is spending more and not less. We want to see a government that is not cutting back on public goods and services. In effect, we want to see an activist budget. Activist in the sense that we deploy our money to improve the conditions of Zimbabweans right now.
Thank you so much for those words. And you, Mr. Mkowe, what do you expect or what do you want to say about this budget?
Okay. What I expect is to see a smooth transition from the TSP to the National Development Strategy. I'm actually expecting to see a budget that will actually complement the National Development Strategy, because the TSP has met majority of its targets except the growth targets for the last section of the TSP. So that's in that aspect, I expect to see continuity from the TSP to the National Development Strategy through the national budget of 2021.
Mr. Ngirante, I know it's a discussion that is interesting. We'd want to say more and more things, but thank you so much for coming through to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
With you again, Mr. Mkowe, thank you so much for coming through to talk about this budget.
And thank you for inviting me.
Yes, that is Mr. Titus Mukowe, an economic analyst who joined us today to talk about the national budget, which is set to be released by the government on 26 November. And we also had Mr. Famba Ingirandi from Zimcode, who also joined us to talk about this program. Until next time, it's bye-bye for now.